England, 1854. The last time Evelyn Hargrave had seen the sky without iron bars was on a rainy afternoon 5 years ago. Now, from the narrow window of the East Tower, she watched the wind shake the oaks on the estate as if they were fragile toys. The late-day light slipped through the bars and painted stripes across the stone floor, always the same stripes, always the same cold floor. She no longer counted the days. She had abandoned that habit the moment she realized counting changed nothing, that time inside those walls moved differently than it did beyond them. The world kept going, she knew. Seasons shifted, people aged, married, died, and she remained, suspended, like a lone musical note no one bothered to hear anymore. Her fingers traced the outline of a crack in the wall, a silent companion that had grown beside her through the years. 19 centimeters now. Evelyn measured everything. It was all one could do when there was nothing left to lose. But that afternoon something shifted. A distant sound. Low, steady, insistent. Hooves, many of them. Then voices. His voice, the housekeeper's, muffled arguments climbing the stone walls like smoke. The key turned in the lock. Evelyn stepped back, her hands trembling. The door swung open. And for the first time in 5 years, a man she had never seen before stepped into the tower, looked at her as though he were staring at a ghost, and spoke a single word that would unravel everything. Forgive me. If you enjoyed this chapter, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts around the world. And before you go, tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. I love discovering how far our tales travel. Evelyn Hargrave was never meant to exist, at least not in any record the world considered worth remembering. The illegitimate daughter of a baron who died before acknowledging her, she grew up on the edges of the estate as a convenient presence. Educated enough not to disgrace the household, discreet enough to be easily forgotten. And yet, some quiet names become dangerous the moment they begin to be remembered. 5 years earlier, on a day that should have been no different from any other, the household doors closed on her. A whisper, a document, an order no one explained, only carried out. And Evelyn, who had never been entitled to more than a corner of shade, learned they could take even that away. Evelyn vanished. The East Tower became her entire world, the narrow bed, the books she knew by heart, the light filtered through the high, barred window. The housekeeper brought food, water, and silence, always the silence. Days and seasons passed without witnesses. Little by little, the emptiness around her turned into an unspoken sentence. No one searched for her. It was as though she had been erased with society's quiet approval, until that October afternoon. Evelyn did not know it yet, but Adrian Beaumont, Duke of Beaumont, was crossing the courtyard with an old guilt and a clear resolve to correct the wrong he had once helped legitimize. The key turned in the lock, and for the first time in 5 years, it wasn't the world forcing the door shut. It was a man determined to open it the right way. Chapter 1. The Open Door. Evelyn didn't move. Not because she refused to, but because her body no longer remembered how to respond to freedom. 5 years before, a locked door had taught her muscles to prefer stillness and her heart to expect nothing. Now, even with that door standing open before her, something inside her remained curled tight, as if the slightest motion might undo the impossible scene unfolding. He was there. A tall man, broad-shouldered beneath a travel-worn coat, his boots marked by fresh mud from the road. The wind seemed to have battled each strand of his brown hair, leaving it in a nearly feral disarray. Evelyn lifted her chin to look at him. With the light behind him, she couldn't make out the color of his eyes, only their intensity. An intensity that cut through her like a blade, as if he could read every night she had buried in silence. "Who are you?" Her voice came out rough, cracked from disuse. Speaking to walls never required gentleness. He hesitated, just for a moment, but long enough for her to notice. When he stepped forward, the window's light revealed the housekeeper behind him, pale, her hands twisting over her apron as though she were wringing out her own guilt. "Adrian Beaumont," he said at last. His voice was low, weighted. Duke of Beaumont. He sounded almost reluctant to claim the title, as if it had no place in that narrow corridor. I've come to take you with me. Take her. The word fell between them with an unfamiliar heaviness. No one came for something erased. No one rescued a ghost. To where? It hardly mattered. Anywhere was far from that tower. But mistrust had always been a more faithful companion than hope. The Duke's gaze swept over the room, the narrow bed, the worn books stacked on the floor, the empty bowl, the small table scarred by time, the crack in the wall, the same one Evelyn had measured with the palm of her hand all these years. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. Anger, not aimed at her but at what he saw. Far from here, he answered. Then he turned to the housekeeper. Prepare whatever is needed. She leaves with me in an hour. Your Grace, I cannot simply... The housekeeper began, but her own voice betrayed her. The Duke lifted his hand, just a gesture, and it was enough to silence her. You can and you will. I've spoken with the steward, he said, his voice steady, and I've learned there is no reason at all for Miss Hargrave to remain here. She will leave with me. Today. The woman opened her mouth, closed it again, and tried to compose herself. Your Grace, I only followed the instructions I was given at the time. No one ever explained anything beyond that. I understand. His gaze was calm but immovable. Even so, your presence will no longer be required. Gather whatever belongs to the young lady. When the woman disappeared down the stairs, Evelyn realized they were alone, she and the man whose gaze held a weight she didn't understand. Why are you here now? The tremor in her voice was small, but impossible to hide. Why 5 years later? The Duke closed his eyes briefly, as if searching for strength in a place that hurt. When he opened them, she saw something unexpected there, a guilt so deep it seemed ready to break him. Because I have only recently learned the truth, he said, each word carefully, painfully chosen. I learned that a terrible mistake was made, and I came to undo it. Mistake, not injustice, a mistake, as if he had been part of it, even without intent. Evelyn stepped back until the cold wall steadied her. You knew. It wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. He stood still, bearing the weight of her gaze like a man accepting a sentence. And in that moment, with the door open after 5 years, with the Duke's face marked by a guilt she still couldn't decipher, Evelyn realized something far more frightening than imprisonment. She didn't know if she wanted freedom, because freedom demanded trust, and trust meant giving someone the power to confine her again. I won't force you, he murmured. No one will ever have the right to close this door again. But the choice to cross it is yours. No. The answer left her before it formed a thought. I don't want to stay. Something shifted in him. Not pride, not triumph. A quiet relief, small enough to be decent, strong enough to betray him. Then be ready, he said simply. And he left, the door behind him wide open, impossibly open. Evelyn stared at that opening, as one might stare into an abyss. The corridor beyond seemed too large, too deep. When she finally stepped forward, the air felt as though it pulled the tower away from her. The second step was worse, a plunge with no promise of ground. At the threshold, the wood beneath her fingertips felt too warm, too alive for someone used to stone. Her descent down the stairs was slow. Her legs trembled, not only from fear, but because 5 years of silence had stolen even the memory of movement. Each step demanded a price her forgotten body struggled to pay. At the ground floor, the housekeeper was waiting for her, pale and unsettled, a small trunk by her feet and a neatly folded dress resting over her arms. The moment she saw Evelyn, she dipped her head briefly and said in a low voice, "Right this way, miss." She led her into a small side vestibule, a modest, quiet room where light filtered through a narrow window. There, away from the curious eyes of the servants and the suffocating stillness of the tower, the housekeeper opened the trunk with trembling hands and laid the dress over a chair. "This was set aside for you," she murmured. "I thought it would be best if you left properly dressed." The fabric felt far too heavy when Evelyn touched it, as though it belonged to a life she was no longer certain she could claim. Without asking a single question, the housekeeper helped her loosen the worn bodice she had lived in for years, adjusted the new dress with quick, almost timid gestures, and made sure everything was in place. "There," she said, stepping back. Evelyn drew a long breath. When she finally returned to the main corridor and descended the last step toward the exit, she felt that each movement was a small but irreversible break from everything she had left behind. She took the last step down. The courtyard opened before her like an entire world. The daylight, once filtered through bars and stone, came to her whole. For a moment, everything turned white. The brightness struck her, forcing her eyes to narrow until shapes returned. The house, the trees, the gravel beneath her feet. The air smelled of rain, fallen leaves, and distance. The wind brushed her skin, and the sensation was almost shockingly beautiful. It had been so long since she felt anything other than stone or darkness. She entered the carriage cautiously, as though afraid the ground might vanish beneath her. The cushions gave beneath her weight, far too soft, almost an insult after so many years. And as the estate disappeared beyond the window, Evelyn didn't look back. Not because she couldn't, but because if she did, she feared she might lose her fragile newborn courage. And she needed to believe, desperately needed to believe, that there was something beyond those walls, even if that something came from the hands of the man who had once allowed them to close. Chapter 2. The Weight of Paper. Adrian Beaumont had not expected her to be so small. Seated across from him in the carriage, drawn in on herself as if trying to take up less space than her own body allowed, Evelyn Hargrave seemed made of fragile light and exhausted bones. Far too pale, far too thin. Her hands rested motionless in her lap, not with serenity, but with the rigid discipline of someone who had learned to exist as little as possible. She didn't look at him. From the moment she sat down, her gaze had remained fixed on the window, drinking in every tree, every hill, every wisp of cloud, as if she were trying to memorize the world before someone could steal it from her again. Adrian felt the familiar tightness rise in his throat. Fear. Not hers, his. Fear that he had come too late, fear that nothing could truly be repaired. He clenched his hand against his thigh, fighting back the anger that had burned in him since he stepped into that tower. Anger at himself, anger at the younger man he had been 5 years earlier, confident, ambitious, certain that official seals did not lie, that documents held more honor than the men who signed them. But paper lied, and he had let it. All of it. Lies. Lies, crafted well enough to deceive him. Where are we going? Her voice cut through his thoughts. Low, cautious, rasped by years of disuse. The question required courage, and he heard it. To my estate in Wiltshire. He tried to keep his tone steady. He didn't want to frighten her more than he already had. You'll be safe there until we settle your situation. My situation. She repeated the words with a trace of bitterness. Then, at last, she turned to look at him. The effect was immediate. Dark eyes, deep, wary, and alive. Alive in a way no prison should have allowed. Adrian felt her gaze pierce him, as if she could see through every layer of restraint he wore for the world, as if she knew his signature lived in the shadows of her past. And what situation is that, Your Grace? Her calmness was sharp as a blade. He hesitated. How much could he reveal without breaking her? How much should he hide without betraying her again? Someone lied about you, he said finally, weighing each syllable. Documents were forged. Your birth was used as a pretext to make you disappear, to ensure no one questioned it. I need to uncover who orchestrated it, and why, before restoring your rights. Invisible. She let out a short, dry sound, almost a laugh, but stripped of any warmth. They succeeded then. Adrian looked away. He wanted to tell her he was sorry. He wanted to explain that he'd been misled, manipulated, kept from the truth with cruel precision. He wanted to swear he would never have authorized it, that he would never have sacrificed a 16-year-old girl. But apologies didn't return time, nor her youth, nor the world stolen from her. Why do you care? The question struck clean and sudden. Why would a duke abandon his duties at court to rescue a bastard no one wanted to see? Because I allowed them to erase you, he thought. Because I lived 5 years unaware of what my own hand had condemned. Because each night I wake seeing your age written beside my signature. Because I must, he said, and the truth slipped out before he could restrain it. Because I failed you once. Evelyn studied him with unsettling precision. Adrian felt an unwelcome heat rise under his collar, as if she could read every weakness he tried to bury beneath the immaculate posture of a duke. Men of title rarely act out of duty alone, she murmured. He almost smiled. She wasn't wrong. And he deserved every accusation left unspoken. Then allow me to prove I can act differently. The words left him before he could filter them, too honest to be comfortable. Evelyn turned back to the window. Her hands tightened around the fabric of her dress, a small gesture but telling. Adrian noticed. I've already lost 5 years, Your Grace, she whispered, more to the glass than to him. I know exactly how heavy time can be. 5 years. She had been 16 when she entered that tower. The blade of guilt sank deeper. He closed his eyes for just a heartbeat. When he opened them, her profile was etched in the afternoon light, fragile yet unexpectedly resilient. Beautiful. The thought came fast, intrusive, and he crushed it with ruthless discipline. He had no right to see her that way, not after what he'd signed. Perhaps not ever. Evelyn Hargrave had survived 5 years of abandonment. She had survived his mistake. And Adrian, struck by a clarity that bordered on cruel, realized he would spend the rest of his life trying to repair what he'd done, even if she never forgave him. The carriage rolled forward to the steady rhythm of hooves. In the silence that settled between them, Adrian reached his decision. No matter the cost, no matter whom he had to confront, no matter how much reputation he had to surrender, he would uncover the truth. He would drag every name into the light. And he would return to Evelyn everything she had been denied, even if it meant admitting to the world that the Duke of Beaumont, crown advisor, trusted statesman, heir to an impeccable lineage, had been blind, naive, and responsible for the fraudulent confinement of a young woman. He owed her that. He owed her far more than he could ever say. Chapter 3. The Unfamiliar House. The Duke's estate was larger than any place Evelyn had ever set foot in. The gardens unfurled in careful curves, the fountains sent clear water breathing into the air, and the windows of the main house glimmered beneath the setting sun, hundreds of golden eyes watching her arrival. It was beautiful, startlingly beautiful, and utterly unfamiliar. When the carriage door opened, Evelyn hesitated. Her legs, unaccustomed to space and movement, felt made of cotton and lead at once. Descending 3 steps demanded the kind of courage once reserved for surviving another day in the tower. She faltered. The world tilted for a moment. A steady hand caught her elbow, keeping her upright. The Duke. He released her the instant he felt her regain balance. The touch was brief, yet it left a warmth far too intense for a day already overflowing with new sensations. Mrs. Pemberley will look after you, he said, motioning toward the woman waiting at the entrance. The housekeeper was a solid figure, hair pulled into a severe bun, dark dress crisp and immaculate, posture suggesting order wherever she stepped. But her eyes were not cold. They studied Evelyn with careful curiosity, as if trying to understand rather than judge. Miss Hargrave, she said, dipping her head, you are most welcome here. Welcome. The word felt strange, almost abrasive from how unfamiliar it was. Evelyn nodded, unsure her voice would obey her. Fresh air, the sound of footsteps inside the house, the movement of servants, distant laughter, everything felt too alive for someone used to the sealed silence of stone. Mrs. Pemberley guided her inside. The entrance hall rose vast around her, too bright, its polished stone floors glowing beneath a chandelier that looked like a constellation caught in place. Her footsteps echoed, and Evelyn instinctively hunched her shoulders, suddenly aware of how small she felt inside so much space. They climbed the stairs slowly. Every step was a battle between frailty and resolve. Her muscles trembled in protest, but she held to the railing and pushed forward. She would not surrender to stillness again. Long corridors followed, lined with portraits, tapestries, soft carpets. The house smelled of polished wood, lit fireplaces, and a floral sweetness she couldn't name. They stopped before a door. "Your rooms, miss." Evelyn stepped inside and froze. The bedroom was larger than the entire tower she had lived in. The canopy bed stood like a silent throne at its center. Dark blue curtains draped from it in heavy waves. A discreet fire warmed the room, and the soft light made the carpet look like a piece of cloud laid across the floor. But it was the window that stole her breath. Tall, wide, unobstructed. Just a pane of glass between her and the world. Gardens, lake, sky, wind. No bars shaping the view, no shadows imposed. Her chest tightened. Freedom could be as disorienting as confinement. "I'll have hot water brought up for your bath," the housekeeper said. "And dinner is at 8. His Grace asks that you join him." Evelyn turned so quickly the room spun. Dinner? With him? It felt too intimate, too wrong, too soon. "It is the custom of the house," Mrs. Pemberley replied, "unless you prefer to dine here." She almost accepted. It would be easier, safer. But hiding here, no matter how beautiful, would be choosing another cage, and she had promised herself she would not become small by choice. "I'll be there," she said. The housekeeper offered a small, approving smile and left. Evelyn stood still in the center of the room, breathing slowly as though convincing her body the floor would not disappear. She approached the window, touched the glass. Cold, smooth, real. Outside, trees swayed, flowers scattered the gardens. The lake glowed gold in the dusk. The first tear fell without warning, then another and another. She cried for the girl she had been, for the hours stolen, for the days that would never return. She cried for the body that had forgotten how to live beyond stone. She cried because for the first time she had a place where she could cry without fear. When the tears faded, she saw the mirror. She walked toward it slowly. The woman reflected there felt almost foreign. Pale, thin, but with eyes carrying a spark she hadn't known was still inside her. A spark born of survival. A knock at the door. Maids entered with hot water and prepared the bath. Evelyn undressed carefully and stepped in. The water burned, then embraced, pulling from her a breath that felt trapped for years. No one locked the door. No one waited for her footsteps. No one recorded anything. But freedom had sharp edges. And touching them made her fear she might bleed. After the bath, she slipped into the soft robe and checked the clock. Nearly 8. She opened the wardrobe. New dresses, gentle fabrics, clothes that seemed to wait for a version of her she didn't yet know. She chose one. Putting it on felt like pulling a quiet promise onto her skin, that she would no longer be a shadow. She lifted her chin, settled the fabric on her shoulders, and walked to the door. She would go downstairs to face the man who had freed her, and who in some way had also been part of her confinement. Chapter 4. The Silent Dinner. Adrian reached the dining room before she did. Deliberately. He needed a few minutes of quiet, minutes to steady thoughts that kept tearing in opposite directions, to decide what he could tell Evelyn, and what still had to remain buried. The full truth could crush her. To know that it had been him, Adrian Beaumont, Duke of Beaumont, not some distant clerk, not an impersonal legal assessment, but his own hand that signed the order confining her for 5 years. It would be devastating. She could barely look at him now. If she knew everything, she might never look at him again. He poured himself wine, drank half the glass in one swallow. The burn scorched his throat, not his guilt. Light footsteps echoed in the corridor. Adrian turned. Evelyn stood at the doorway. She wore a simple navy dress, elegant in its restraint, emphasizing the thinness of her shoulders and the delicate line of her neck. Her hair was gathered in a loose bun, a few strands softening her still pale features. But it wasn't the dress that struck him. It was her bearing. Evelyn crossed the threshold like someone held together from within. Chin lifted, spine straight, dignity worn over wounds that had not yet closed. "Miss Hargrave," Adrian said, gesturing to the chair beside his right, "please." She moved toward the table slowly, taking in the room as though mapping unknown territory. The long table, the silver candelabras, the servants standing motionless along the walls, shadows trained not to exist. She sat with care, as if testing both the weight of the chair and the reality of the floor beneath her feet. Adrian took his own seat. A discreet nod set the meal in motion. Hot soup, fresh bread. Dark wine. Evelyn stared at the plate before her with an unreadable expression, not confusion exactly, but as though she were trying to recall the natural order of things. Adrian leaned slightly toward her, voice low, and meant only for her. "You don't have to eat if you'd rather not." She lifted her eyes, surprise clear. 5 years of cold porridge taught me not to waste food, Your Grace." There was no dramatization in her words. Their simplicity hurt more than any open accusation. Adrian tightened his grip on the fork. "I'm sorry," he said, the words difficult, "for what you endured." "You apologize," she murmured, stirring her soup slowly. "But you don't explain why." He drew a breath. "Because I can't. Not yet." "Can't." Her eyes rose to meet his, steady. "Or won't." There was a clear light in her gaze, not anger but clarity, as if saying, "Don't waste lies on me." He wouldn't. "Both," he admitted. "There are things I must confirm. And people I need to confront. And meanwhile," her voice was quiet but sharp, "you expect me to trust blindly the man who admits he made a terrible mistake, the mistake that led to my confinement in that place." The words seemed to echo in the walls. The servants didn't move. Years of service had trained them not to hear. Still, Adrian felt his stomach tighten. "I'm not asking for blind trust." He straightened, meeting her eyes. "I'm asking for time. Only a few weeks. After that, I'll tell you everything. Everything. Everything." She studied him in silence. He endured that examination with the steadiness of a man willing to accept whatever sentence followed. At last, Evelyn lowered her gaze. "A few weeks," she repeated. "And after that?" "After that," he said, voice firmer than he expected, "you'll be free to go wherever you choose. I'll ensure it. Your name will be restored. And those who wronged you will face consequences." A short sound escaped her, something close to a laugh but stripped of joy. "You speak as though you could move the world, Your Grace." "I'm a duke," he replied, without arrogance, simply stating fact. "And within reason I can move more than you think." "And yet," she countered, with a softness that cut deeper than shouting, "you moved nothing before. You waited 5 years. 5 years." The blade she wielded with precision, striking exactly where it hurt. "Because I learned the truth too late." The honesty dropped between them, heavy. "And that failure will follow me for the rest of my life." She lifted the spoon to her mouth for the first time. Adrian saw her eyes close briefly, not in pleasure but in recognition of something forgotten. Warmth, seasoning, real food. They ate in silence for several minutes. The clink of cutlery, the crackle of the fire, the muffled movements of servants bringing the next course filled the room. Evelyn's gestures were careful, controlled, as if anything she touched might break. And every so often, her gaze drifted to the door, checking that it was still open. Adrian noticed. "While you're under my roof," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her, "no one will lock a door on you. No one will touch your freedom." Evelyn faltered. The spoon hovered in the air, suspended for a moment too long. "Not even you," she whispered. The question sliced through him. "Not even me," he answered, putting everything he had into those 2 words. "Especially me." Something shifted in her, barely. Not trust, but the suggestion of a crack in the wall. It was more than he had any right to expect, and far less than he needed to deserve. The dinner came to an end. Evelyn rose with the poised restraint of someone who had survived by occupying the smallest space possible. "Thank you for the dinner, Your Grace," she said, with a formality that didn't belong to her, but served as armor. She bowed her head and left the room. Adrian remained seated at the head of the table, staring at the empty chair where she had been. He felt the weight of what he had promised, the weight of what he still hadn't revealed. Tomorrow, it would begin. He would hunt down every document, every seal, every signature that had touched the name Evelyn Hargrave. He would search through old files, even the ones he himself had signed as deputy advisor to the Crown, the same documents someone had twisted to turn her into a fabricated threat. He would dismantle those lies one by one, layer by layer, until the truth stood bare behind the false reports that had branded her unstable. And when he found who orchestrated it all, and why, he would do whatever it took to bring each one of them down, even if it meant challenging names higher than his own. After that, he would face the hardest part, himself, and maybe only then he would manage to meet her eyes without seeing the 16-year-old girl he had failed. For now he knew only one thing. The silence of that dinner had spoken louder than any speech, and he had precious little time to become worthy of the second chance he didn't deserve, but desperately needed to earn. He needed to be worthy of her, not out of guilt, not out of honor, but because, though he did not dare admit it even to himself, something within him had already begun choosing Evelyn Hargrave. Chapter 5. Fragments of Truth. Evelyn woke in the dark with her heart racing. For a moment she expected the rough curve of stone, the shadow of bars cutting across the ceiling, the narrow space that had been her entire world for so many years. But all she found was open silence, air, depth, no wall close enough to touch, no forced boundary. It took 3 slow breaths to remember. She was no longer in the tower. She was free, or in something that resembled freedom, still too beautiful, too vast to fit inside her. She lit the candle on her bedside table. The small flame flickered, sending restless shadows across the blue-washed walls. She rose, crossed the room with cautious steps, and went to the window. Outside, the garden slept under the waxing moon, still trees, silvered flower beds, the lake holding a pale reflection. Nothing between her and the world, no metal, no cold command. Even so, freedom still felt like a borrowed dress, beautiful, but strange across her shoulders. The days that followed shaped themselves into a hesitant routine, made of tryings and small victories. She took breakfast alone in her chambers, where the quiet didn't frighten her as much. Then she walked through the gardens, always accompanied by Mrs. Pemberley, who spoke little, observed much, and never outpaced the rhythm Evelyn could manage. In the afternoons, she sought refuge in the library. There, she touched book spines like someone exploring a newly discovered continent. Atlases, novels, travel journals. She read until her eyes burned, and the afternoon light melted into gold. And at night, she sat down to dine with the Duke. Their conversations were careful, almost fragile. Comments about the garden, books, bits of news, the weather. He never mentioned the past. She didn't either. But Evelyn watched. She noticed how he arrived with tension in his expression and ink stains on his fingers, as if he spent the day writing things he trusted no one else to know. She noticed how he read certain letters twice before tossing them into the fire. She noticed the earnest way he listened, even to the smallest things she said. It was as if, for the first time, someone believed she had the right to exist. On the 5th night, the silence between them was denser than usual. Evelyn broke it. "Did you know me? Before the tower?" Adrian's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "No," he said after a taut pause. "We never met." "Then how did you learn about me?" Conflict flickered through his eyes like broken shadow. "Documents," he said at last. "Your name appeared in reports, directives, accusations." Evelyn laid her utensils down slowly. "And you believed them?" "Yes." No defense, no attempt to soften it. "I believed." The starkness of that yes struck her harder than any direct insult. "What did they say?" she asked. What could make a duke believe a 16-year-old bastard girl was dangerous? Adrian closed his eyes for a moment, as if the words still burned him. That you were involved with foreign agents, that you had access to sensitive information, that you posed a threat to the Crown, that you needed to be contained, quietly. The cold bureaucracy of the claims clashed with the horror of their result. I barely knew French, Evelyn whispered. I barely saw anyone. How could I conspire against anything at all? You couldn't. His voice was aimed at himself, sharp and punishing. Everything was fabricated, every line. By whom? I don't know yet. He met her gaze, unwavering. But I will. For the first time, Evelyn believed him. She didn't know why. She simply did. And when you find out, she asked, what will you do? I'll see justice done. She held that word in silence. It felt far too light to carry 5 stolen years. Will that give me back the time? She asked, without bitterness. No. His jaw tightened. And I'm sorry. More than I know how to say. The silence between them thickened, almost solid. Then the truth escaped her before she could hold it back. I'm afraid. His head snapped up immediately, as if something inside him had been torn open. Afraid of what? Evelyn drew a breath. That this is temporary. That I'll wake one morning and find myself back in that tower. Or worse. That everything I have now will be taken again. Adrian leaned forward, his gaze fierce enough to strip the air. That will not happen. You can't guarantee that. I can. His certainty was almost tangible. While you're under my protection, no one will touch your freedom. No one will lock a door on you. No one will dare harm you. Her chest tightened. You don't know me, she whispered. You owe me nothing beyond what was taken. His answer came too quickly, too instinctively, stronger than he intended. I owe you everything. The air shifted. He realized his own intensity, a heartbeat too late. He straightened, withdrawing. Forgive me, he said, rising. That was inappropriate. It was honest, Evelyn corrected, without thinking. He stopped, turned slowly. His eyes held something she couldn't name. Pain, recognition, and something more fragile, more dangerous. For an instant, they simply looked at each other. There was something there, fragile, wrong, inevitable, something that should not exist between a wounded woman and the man who had failed her, and yet it grew in the space between their words, something as dangerous as freedom itself. Good night, Miss Hargrave, he said at last. Good night, Your Grace. He left without looking back. Evelyn remained alone in the dining room, staring at the empty chair before her. She felt something shift inside her, small, timid, but undeniably real. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps it was the first sign that Adrian Beaumont carried chains as heavy as the ones she had borne, chains that bound them in a truth still fractured, a truth that might free them or destroy them completely. Chapter 6. The Buried Truth. For 3 days, Adrian remained almost completely shut away in his study. The desk, once orderly, was now drowned beneath aged papers, misplaced files, records that should have been burned years ago. The room smelled of dried ink, dust, and old political decisions. Adrian had called in favors from powerful men, collected debts, pressured contacts who preferred not to be remembered. He had threatened some, persuaded others, and at last, he found it. The name appeared in a discreet line of a letter stamped with the Privy Council seal, a 5-year-old correspondence that was never meant to reach him. Lord Clarence Mortimer, influential member of the Privy Council, political mentor to many young men, including Adrian, and the man who had signed Evelyn Hargrave's silent sentence, the man who had engineered everything. The truth, laid bare before Adrian now, was worse than any political conspiracy. Evelyn had never been a threat. Never involved in anything beyond staying alive. Her father, the Baron who had died before formally acknowledging her, had left an informal will scribbled in haste weeks before his death. It did not legitimize her, but it granted Evelyn something far more dangerous to men like Mortimer, a lifetime right to dwell on the estate, the right to remain in the home she grew up in, on the land she had known since childhood. And there were witnesses, servants, neighbors, the local physician. Everyone knew Evelyn had been the only one with the Baron in his final days. Everyone knew he had tried to protect her in the only way he could. That was enough for any court to honor the usufruct. And usufruct meant legal obstruction. No one could sell or transfer the estate without the girl's consent. To Mortimer, that made Evelyn his greatest obstacle, and one who could not be bribed, threatened, or ignored. He didn't need to kill her. He only needed to make her existence irrelevant. Invisible, incapable, and quickly. The medical confinement appeared as the perfect solution, a report signed by 2 complicit physicians, both appointed by Mortimer, claiming Evelyn suffered from severe emotional instability and must be removed immediately for her own protection and that of the community. No guardian, no lawyer, no voice. The East Tower had become her cell, not a state prison, but worse, a fraudulent medical confinement no one dared to question. Adrian reread the primary document, feeling his stomach clench. Authorized for immediate removal for safekeeping, ensuring the young woman's well-being and that of the community. And beside it, like an irremovable stain, his signature. The signature that, 5 years ago, he had believed was nothing more than an administrative formality, bureaucratic routine, an urgent request from a respected councilman. Now he saw it for what it truly was. Mortimer had been meticulous. Official reports, medical jargon, authentic seals, manufactured urgency. Everything looked legitimate, and Adrian, a young advisor trusting the wrong mentor, had not questioned enough. Anger rose in him like a physical blow. He crushed the letter in his hand until the paper tore. Mortimer had used his trust, used his youth, his loyalty, his sense of duty, presented forged documents wrapped in the appearance of national necessity, and Adrian had signed. Signed without seeing the trap, without seeing Evelyn. Now he saw everything. A knock on the door. He looked up to find Mrs. Pemberley wearing a grave expression. "Your Grace," she said, "Miss Hargrave is in the gardens. She asked not to be disturbed, but she has been in the same spot for quite some time, so I thought you'd wish to know." Adrian rose immediately. "How long?" "2 hours, sir." "By the lake." 2 hours alone at the lake. He didn't know whether that was good or alarming. He left the house barely feeling the steps beneath him. He crossed the gardens, past rose beds, across the grassy corridors, until he saw the lake's edge. And she was there. Seated in the grass, barefoot, her feet among wildflowers, her simple dress spread around her like part of the landscape. Her face turned toward her reflection in the water. Serene. Perhaps for the first time since he had met her. Adrian stopped a few paces away, reluctant to break the moment. But Evelyn turned slightly as if she had known he was there all along. "Your Grace," she greeted without rising. He inclined his head. "I didn't wish to disturb you." "Then why did you come?" she asked, her voice soft but not naive. The true answer burned on his tongue. "Because you have haunted my thoughts since the moment I learned what I did to you." But instead, he simply said, "I needed air." The faint smile she gave him made clear she didn't believe that. "Sit, then," she murmured. "The grass is pleasant today." He hesitated. Sitting beside her, so close, so unguarded, felt like crossing a boundary he still didn't understand. But she waited, and the truth was simple. He couldn't walk away. He sat, left a respectful space between them, but close enough to share the warm light filtering through the trees. "They never let me see a lake before," she said, eyes still on the water. "From the tower, I saw only rooftops and a sliver of sky, nothing alive. Nothing that moved." The familiar rush of guilt hit him hard. "I'm sorry." His voice broke. "So very sorry." "You say that often," she noted, not sharply, just stating a fact. "Because it's true." Evelyn turned her head slightly, studying him. "And if I told you your apologies change nothing of what I lived?" He drew a long breath. "I would say you're right, and I would apologize anyway." She exhaled, a sound more weary than sad. "Did you find something?" "Hey, in all those documents you pore over." He closed his eyes briefly. He knew he could no longer hide it. "Yes, I found the one behind it all." Evelyn stilled. "Who?" Lord Mortimer, Privy Council. He wanted your father's land, and needed to ensure no possible heir would ever claim it. Evelyn lowered her gaze. So I was locked away for greed, she murmured. For land that would never be legally mine, but that gave me the right to live on it. Yes. Silence stretched, long, heavy, absorbing the blow. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, steady, far too controlled. And you? She asked. How did you become involved? This was the moment Adrian had feared since the day he first saw her. Mortimer came to me, he said, choosing each word carefully. He brought falsified documents bearing a legitimate seal, presented the confinement as an urgent matter for your safety and the safety of those around you. And he swallowed. I signed, without questioning enough, without sensing what lay beneath. Silence again. When he dared to look at her, Evelyn was not furious, which somehow hurt more. She looked tired, as though confirming something she had always suspected. Your signature, she said softly, without accusation, locked me in that tower. Yes, he whispered. And I will carry that until the last day of my life. Evelyn turned fully toward him. And now you wish to fix it, redeem yourself. Yes. Why? The question struck him with raw honesty. Why not simply send me away? Why care this much? Every possible answer burned inside him. The guilt, the moral weight, the need to make it right, and something else, something he didn't know how to name. Because I must, he said finally. And because you deserve justice. Real justice. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then unexpectedly she extended her hand. She touched his arm. It was brief, light as breath, yet it set fire to every nerve in him. Thank you for telling me, she murmured. Adrian looked down at the place where she had touched him. When he raised his gaze again, his voice was quiet, controlled, but laced with intent. Mortimer will be exposed. I'll take back everything he stole. I'll clear your name. Evelyn looked toward the lake. And yours? She asked. What will become of your name when everyone learns you signed the papers? That doesn't matter. It does, she said, not harshly, just painfully honest. Without your position, you can't help anyone. Not yourself. Not me. He absorbed the truth of her words. She was right. As always. Then we'll find another way, he said firmly. But Mortimer will answer for what he's done. That I swear. She nodded slowly. There was no forgiveness in the gesture. But there was understanding, perhaps even a measure of respect. Adrian remained seated beside her in silence, while the breeze rippled across the lake's surface. Something had shifted. Not a promise of romance, not yet, but a promise of alliance, of truth shared. Chapter 7. The Name She Dare Not Speak. Evelyn had begun to dream of him, not romantic dreams, nothing so pure or simple. Fragmented dreams, restless, uneasy things. Sometimes Adrian stood on the other side of a locked door, calling her name while she struggled to turn the handle. Sometimes she was the one erasing letters on a document until her own name disappeared. Sometimes he looked at her with that quiet guilt. And in the dream she finally understood everything she still refused to face awake. She always woke with her heart clenched, caught in a state she had no name for, because something was changing, something that shouldn't, something as inevitable as it was dangerous. During the day, Evelyn tried not to watch him, but it was useless. Too often she caught herself doing just that. She saw how his shoulders carried a weight no one else could see. She saw his fingers tap lightly against the table when he was thinking. She saw his expression soften, just a little, whenever she spoke. She saw the way he sometimes looked away too quickly at dinner, as if afraid to reveal something. And the most frightening part, she was growing accustomed to being seen by him, and worse, she was beginning to want it. On the second week, Adrian invited her to see the conservatory. Evelyn hesitated at the glass door, not because of the place, but because she would be alone with him there. Still, she stepped inside. It was another world entirely. Filtered light, warm air, plants she had never imagined, orchids, towering ferns, flowers from countries she had only read about. "My mother loved this place," Adrian said, touching a white orchid with an uncommon gentleness for a man like him. "She died when I was 12. I've kept it as she left it." There was an old sorrow in his voice, a kind of loss Evelyn recognized. "You miss her," she said softly. "Every day," he answered, and before she could stop herself, Evelyn asked, "Would she be proud of the man you've become?" Adrian stilled, turned slowly. For a moment Evelyn felt she had stepped into forbidden territory. "I don't know," he said at last, a bitter smile tugging at his mouth. "Perhaps once. Now." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. "You're trying to mend a wrong," she whispered. "That must count for something." He took a single step toward her, just one, yet the distance between them vanished. Her heartbeat stumbled in a way that unsettled her. "5 years of your life," Adrian said, his voice low. "Tell me, how does one repair that?" "You don't," she replied. "But sometimes you can build something on what remains." The words surprised even her. They surprised him too. Adrian looked at her in a way he never had before. Not as a victim, not as a responsibility, as a woman. "You're stronger than I imagined," he said, almost under his breath. "Or simply too tired to stay angry," she murmured. "You have every right to be." "I know." She touched one of the white petals with gentle fingers. "But anger consumes, and I've lived exhausted for too long." A long silence followed. Not uncomfortable, but full of something growing, alive, dangerous. When he spoke again, his voice held a softness she had never heard from him. "May I ask you something?" She nodded. "When all of this is over, when Mortimer is held accountable, when your name is cleared, what do you want for your life?" No one had ever asked her that, ever. Evelyn needed time to understand the question, time to accept that she had the right to a future. "I want," she faltered, drew a breath. "I want to be recognized, not as a bastard, not as a mistake, not as a problem to be hidden away. I want to be seen for who I truly am." The answer sounded simple, but carried years of weight. Adrian listened without blinking, and then, before she could turn away, he said, "I see you, and I know who you truly are." Just a sentence, but it moved through her like an electric current. Before she could breathe properly, he was closer. She hadn't noticed him move. Perhaps he hadn't noticed either. She felt his warmth first. Then the faint scent of ink, paper, and something that belonged only to him. "I see a woman," Adrian continued, "who survived what would have broken many. I see intelligence. I see strength. I see grace. I see someone who should be dancing in grand halls, not locked in towers. I see someone who deserves everything she was denied." Evelyn couldn't speak, couldn't move. "Your Grace," she tried. "Adrian," he said, almost pleading. "When you use the title, I hear the man who signed your sentence. I don't want to be that man near you. Call me Adrian." She stepped back half a pace, not away, just enough to breathe. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because if I say your name, I'll let something in I cannot control. Because your name on my lips would change everything. Because I cannot want the man whose signature stole 5 years from me. Because it isn't right. Because it isn't safe. Because it would be improper," she said finally. Adrian blinked once, a step back. Her retreat so slight it was almost invisible, but she felt it like the air had chilled. "Yes," he said, regaining his composure. "You're right." The silence that followed was so fragile, it felt like glass about to shatter. Evelyn searched for words to restore distance, any distance. "The flowers are beautiful," she said, though her voice wavered. "They are," he replied. But he wasn't looking at the flowers. He was looking at her. And in that moment, in that quiet, burning, dangerous gaze, Evelyn understood something with devastating clarity. There was something different between them, growing, something that shouldn't exist, something as delicate as it was forbidden, something that both drew her and terrified her. "I should go," she said suddenly, barely audible. "Eve—" But he didn't finish, because his voice saying Evelyn was already too intimate. She turned, left the conservatory without looking back. Crossed the gardens, entered the house, climbed the stairs. She closed the door behind her and let out a bitter laugh at the irony of locking herself in by choice. But she wasn't running from Adrian. She was running from herself, from what she was beginning to feel, from the impossible thing forming beneath her feet. For Evelyn Hargrave, against logic, reason, and every shred of caution, was beginning to fall in love with the man whose signature had marked the beginning of her darkness. And there was no tower high enough, no door strong enough to shield her from that truth. Chapter 8. The Sacrifice. Adrian did not sleep. He spent the entire night lying on his back, eyes fixed on the ceiling, replaying in silence the way Evelyn had left the conservatory, not fleeing from him exactly, but from something within herself she had not yet dared to name. And there was also the moment she refused to speak his name, not out of disdain, but out of caution, out of self-protection. Because names carried weight, and certain intimacies only existed when the heart felt safe. He had crossed a line, and the most unsettling part was admitting that some part of him wanted to cross it again. She slipped into his thoughts more often than he cared to confess, a name, a gesture, a glance that infiltrated the empty spaces of the day. He found himself watching her when she didn't notice, the way she walked with a careful grace that disguised strength, the way she touched objects with newly awakened curiosity, the way her eyes seemed to measure the world before she allowed it to reach her. And he liked what he saw, her resilience, her meaningful silences, the quiet light in her gaze when she allowed him a glimpse of what she felt. He liked it, perhaps more than he should. But Evelyn deserved more than his guilt, more than the man who had signed the order confining her, even if unwittingly, even if deceived. She deserved the right to choose her own future, without debts, without shadows, without him as a walking reminder of everything she had lost. She deserved true freedom, and as long as he remained her protector and her keeper, that freedom would never be complete. At dawn, he made his decision. He called for his secretary and his solicitor, locked himself in the study with them for hours, reviewed clauses, amended instructions, erased traces. He couldn't simply hand her property. That would draw scrutiny, stir rumors, ignite scandal. Any reckless movement would destroy Evelyn before she had the chance to rebuild her life. But he could ensure her a lifetime income, independent management of her affairs, access to resources with no public tie to his name, and full legal autonomy. This was how one gave someone their freedom back. And above all, this was how he prepared the world so Evelyn would never depend on him, or on anyone, ever again. It was the bare minimum price for 5 stolen years. He was signing the last document when a knock sounded at the door. His secretary entered, pale. "Your Grace, Lord Mortimer has arrived. He demands to be received." Adrian's blood cooled, not with fear, but with recognition. Mortimer knew. "How?" Adrian asked, though he already knew no answer would satisfy. "I cannot say, sir." "But he appears unsettled." Of course he knew. Men like Mortimer always knew everything. "Bring him to the study," Adrian ordered, dismissing the solicitor, "and ask Mrs. Pemberley to keep Miss Hargrave in her rooms. She mustn't come downstairs under any circumstance." The secretary nodded and vanished. The heavy silence of the study seemed to breathe. Adrian prepared himself. Mortimer entered without knocking, rigid posture, stone-cut expression, authority woven into every line of his body. His silver hair gleamed. His eyes were cold steel. "Beaumont," he said without greeting, "I hope you have a reasonable explanation for your recent movements." Adrian rose slowly. "I owe no explanations to a man who destroyed a life out of ambition." One of Mortimer's brows arched elegantly, dangerously, careful with reckless accusations. Words have weight, especially when spoken by someone standing on such fragile ground. "I have letters, dispatches, memoranda. I know exactly what you did, and why." The silence that followed was sharp as a drawn blade. Mortimer stepped closer, studying him as one might assess how far an opponent was willing to go. "I see. And what is your intention? To expose everything? Ruin my name, yours?" His smile was a thin, poisonous curve. "Do not forget, Beaumont. Your signature is on every order. To the world, you are no victim. You are accomplice. I know. And still you wish to proceed?" "Yes." Mortimer exhaled, a soft sound of disdain. "For whom?" he asked, each syllable dripping venom. "For that illegitimate girl? You would destroy your name and influence? For her?" The answer came without hesitation. "Yes." Mortimer's eyes sharpened, calculating, predatory. "You are more foolish than I believed," he murmured, "and far more dangerous. So here is my proposal. I am not your enemy. I will give the girl whatever she wants: income, land, a clean reputation. I will make this disappear, but you—" He tilted his chin. "You remain silent. We preserve our names, and we move forward." Adrian didn't move. It was a beautifully laid trap, and devastatingly logical. Mortimer went on, "Justice, Beaumont, is the fantasy of idealists. What exists is power, and I have more than you ever will." Anger surged through Adrian, hot and immediate, but he held it in check. Mortimer was right about one thing. Exposing everything would leave him defenseless, without a name, without influence, unable to protect Evelyn when she needed him most. But accepting that deal would be betrayal. Betrayal of her, betrayal of what she deserved, betrayal of who he had become. "No," Adrian said, voice steady. "I will not make any agreement with you. The truth will come out. Evelyn Hargrave will have everything that was denied her, and you will face the consequences. Even if I face mine alongside you." Mortimer's eyes narrowed, a predator gauging the audacity of its prey. "Then you choose your own ruin." "Yes." Mortimer reached the door but paused before opening it. "Does she know?" he asked without turning. "Does she know you are willing to sacrifice your entire life for her?" "No." "Tell her," Mortimer said. "She might find it amusing that the man who signed her confinement now burns his own name on her behalf." And he left. The door snapped shut behind him. Adrian stood frozen for long seconds. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with conviction. He knew the path he had chosen. Tomorrow he would bring everything before Parliament. Tomorrow he would lay his reputation on the altar of truth, and Evelyn would be free, truly free, free to walk toward him or to leave him forever. It was there, in the thick silence of the study, that the truth struck him with the force of something unavoidable. He felt something for her, something he still couldn't name, too vast for remorse, too deep for duty alone. He only knew that Evelyn Hargrave had long ceased to be the girl whose voice he had allowed to be silenced. She had become presence, conscience, center. And the more he thought about it, the clearer it became that nothing he did, no document, no verdict, no reparation, could give back the years she lost because of him. But he still wanted to try. He wanted to become the kind of man who could one day walk beside her without the shadow of the past as his only identity. Adrian sank slowly into his chair and covered his face with his hands. Tomorrow he would face the world in the name of truth. But tonight, he needed to find the courage to tell her everything, and with the humility of someone standing on the edge of losing something precious, he wished for only one thing, that she wouldn't reject him entirely. For though he still lacked the words to define what he felt, one certainty already lived in him. Some feelings arrive long before the names meant to contain them, and he was finally beginning to understand that. Chapter 9. The Truth That Frees. Evelyn knew something was wrong before she heard a single word. Mrs. Pemberley knocked on the door with unusual urgency, 3 quick raps, none of her usual measured composure. "Miss Hargrave," the housekeeper's voice came tight through the wood. "His Grace requests your presence in the library at once." At once. Evelyn's stomach tightened. She grabbed the first dress she found, twisted her hair up in a hurried knot, and went down the stairs faster than her body was truly ready for. The corridor, which had often seemed long, felt like a strange tunnel that morning. At the library door she had to pause and draw one steadying breath before entering. Adrian stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, his posture strung taut like a bow. The pale morning light carved deep shadows beneath his eyes. It looked as if he hadn't slept, more than usual. He turned when she stepped in. "What happened?" Evelyn asked, dispensing with any pretense of calm. "Please sit," he said. She obeyed, though every part of her felt poised to bolt. Adrian came closer, but instead of taking his place behind the desk, he chose the chair beside her. Like a man about to face a trial he could no longer postpone. "I need to tell you everything," he began, his voice lower than usual, "and after that the choice will be yours." A chill traced its way down her spine. "You're frightening me," she said. "I know." His answer was a murmur. "And I'm sorry for that as well." Only then did he sit. Up close she could see the faint tremor in his hands. "Lord Mortimer was here this morning," he said. "He came demanding explanations and offering a bargain." The word fell heavy between them. "What sort of bargain?" Evelyn asked. "To give you everything that is yours by right," he replied. "Income, restitution, a spotless reputation. On one condition." "What condition?" "That I remain silent about his part in all of it." Something cold settled in the center of her chest. "And did you accept?" she asked. "No." The answer came so swiftly it nearly cut her off. "I would not accept it under any circumstance." The air rushed from her lungs in a breath she hadn't noticed she was holding. "But refusing," she began, "means," he finished, "that I will make public everything I've uncovered. The manipulation, the stolen land, the forged documents, all of it will come to light, including," he faltered. When he met her eyes, she saw the decision already made there. "Including my own part," he said. "I will say that it was I who signed the order for your confinement, that I trusted Mortimer when I should have questioned him, that for 5 years I was not the man I ought to have been. My reputation will be stained. I may lose influence, any standing I still have in London. And when that happens, I may not be able to protect you as I do now." Evelyn needed several moments to gather the pieces. "You're saying you intend to offer yourself to scandal," she murmured. "I'm saying," he corrected quietly, "that there is a truth that must be spoken, and that responsibility is mine, not yours." "Adrian." The name slipped out before she could catch it. She saw the flicker of surprise, and something else, cross his face when he heard it from her lips. "This is too extreme." "Mortimer deceived you. That's not the same as having planned it all." "Deceived or not," he replied, "the pen was in my hand. No one held it for me. The guilt is mine, in part." The silence that followed seemed to thicken the air between them. Evelyn studied him. She saw the exhaustion. She saw the guilt. She also saw the steadiness of a man who had already burned his ships behind him, and something else, something she would never have dared name a few weeks earlier. "If you do this," she said at last, "Mortimer loses, but he also wins." He frowned. "How?" "If your influence is destroyed," she said slowly, "he loses an opponent, but the system that shields him remains intact. Men like him will keep acting. How many others will be sacrificed in silence? How many Evelyns?" The word escaped before she could soften it. "Won't have a duke willing to risk everything for them." For the first time, he seemed truly shaken. "What are you suggesting?" he asked. She wet her lips, fully aware that months ago she would never have imagined suggesting anything to a man like him. "That you use the power you still have," she said, calm by choice. "Bring Mortimer down first. Strip him of what he has taken from so many. When he stands exposed, isolated, with no allies, if you still feel you must confess your own fault, then it will be your choice. But don't waste the chance to make real justice." Adrian looked at her with an intensity that almost made her look away. "How can you think like this?" he murmured, "after what you endured? How can you think of what is best for others, and not only for yourself?" It isn't generosity, she said, and knew it was true. It's prudence. I know what it is to have no one who will question anything on your behalf. I don't want others walking through the same darkness if it can be prevented. She hesitated. Then, driven by an impulse that scared her, she reached out. Her fingers brushed his arm, a small gesture, but deliberate. And because, she added, almost in a whisper, I understand something now. What? His voice was rough. That the man who signed that paper 5 years ago is not the same man sitting in front of me today. That one was too sure, too blind. This one, her fingers tightened slightly, this one questions, fights, is willing to stand against his own world for what he believes is right. That man should use the influence he has for good, not place it back in the hands of men like Mortimer. His hand came down over hers, just like that, but the weight of the gesture ran straight through them both. His hand was large, warm, faintly unsteady. I don't deserve that kind of trust, he murmured. Perhaps not, she replied without adornment. But you have it, and that doesn't depend on deserving. They stayed that way for a moment, joined at that small point of contact. When he spoke again, something in his voice had changed. Evelyn, he said softly. She felt her name run along her skin like a shiver. You should know, he went on, that what I feel for you can no longer be called responsibility or remorse alone. Her breath caught. I tried to fight it, he said, his eyes locked on hers. It's improper in more ways than I can count, and yet it remains. I am more bound to you than is wise to admit. The affection I bear you is far deeper than guilt. It wasn't precisely, I love you, but it was close enough to hurt. Evelyn could have pulled back, could have told him it was too soon, too improper, impossible. But none of that was what she felt. I know, she answered, with an honesty that pierced her own defenses. Because, she searched for words, because something has changed in me as well. I don't know when or how. I only know that what I feel when you are near is no longer just gratitude or anger. It's something else, something more dangerous. Adrian's eyes closed briefly, as if bracing himself. When he opened them, he leaned in a little. I won't do anything that frightens you, he said. If you want me to stop here, She couldn't have said which part of her moved first. Perhaps the part that had learned to live with nothing. Perhaps the part that finally dared to want. Evelyn lifted her face, only a little, just enough for him to see the silent permission. Adrian moved closer, slowly, as if afraid of breaking something precious. Time seemed to stretch between them, fragile, still reversible. Then their lips met. The kiss was not perfect nor practiced. It tasted of held breath and delayed words, of fear and courage mingled together, of forgiveness still distant, and a future they weren't sure they would be allowed. Evelyn's heart hammered so hard it hurt. She felt his hands cradle her face as though he feared she might vanish. And above everything, she felt that she was choosing. When they parted, both were breathless. Adrian kept his forehead against hers, eyes closed. This changes everything, he murmured. I know, she answered. He drew a long breath, as if gathering back some measure of discipline. I still have to bring Mortimer down, he said. I still have to carry the truth forward. I cannot promise I will emerge untouched. They may strip me of everything. I may end as only a man with his own name, and even that, stained. Evelyn studied him for a moment, then smiled. A small smile, but real. 5 years were taken from me, she said. No one can return those. But the future, perhaps we can build that differently. If you still wish me to be part of that future, he replied earnest, I will spend the rest of my days trying to make amends for how I failed you and what I cost you. She brushed a fingertip along the line of his jaw, feeling the roughness of his unshaven skin. I don't want a perfect man, Adrian, she whispered. I want a man who knows the weight of his own faults and still chooses what is right. If that is the man beside me, then yes, I want you in my future. Something rare lit his eyes. Not only hope, but a kind of stunned gratitude. We'll face Mortimer, she said, not as victim and culprit, but as allies. He smiled, brief but genuine. Together, he said. And for the first time since she left the tower, Evelyn felt that the word freedom was complete. It was not merely the absence of bars. It was the power to choose whom to trust, to choose whom to stand beside, to choose at last whom to love. And she chose Adrian Beaumont, not in spite of the past, but with full knowledge of it. The world beyond those walls was still dangerous. Mortimer still held power. The truth would still demand its price. But as they rose side by side in that library, Evelyn knew that whatever the cost, she would not face any of it alone. Chapter 10. The Day the Truth Spoke. London woke grey that morning, but it wasn't the sky that felt heavy. It was the air. The crackle of expectation, the quiet murmur that something important was about to happen. Adrian felt it the moment he stepped down from the carriage in front of the building where the case would be heard. Mortimer would be called to answer. He would be called as well. And at last the truth would be given a voice. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the moment Evelyn walked in at his side. The entire entrance hall seemed to hold its breath. She wore a simple dress perfectly cut, her hair pinned back without ornament, her posture straight, calm, almost serene. There was no extravagance. There was presence. Some stared at her as if they were seeing a ghost, others as if watching the spark of a scandal waiting to ignite. But Evelyn walked as if none of it could reach her. Adrian offered his arm. She took it, not out of frailty, but as a deliberate choice. "Are you certain?" he murmured. 5 years silent, she replied. "Today I will not be silent." When they entered the chamber, Mortimer was already there. The faint paling of his face when he saw Evelyn was almost imperceptible, but Adrian caught it. It was the look of a man who never expected the past to take shape again, much less to find its voice. "Miss Hargrave," Mortimer began with polished cordiality, "I regret deeply that you—" "Spare us," she cut in, without raising her voice. "I'd rather hear your explanation in front of everyone." The magistrate called the room to order. The session began. Mortimer delivered the version he had prepared, that he had protected the public good, that he had acted on medical recommendations, that everything had been regrettable but necessary. But each word lost weight as Adrian laid out the documents. First, the altered dates, then the medical reports written at Mortimer's command. The coded letters where Evelyn was described as an obstacle, the payments to intermediaries, the fabricated justifications for her confinement, and finally the financial motive, cold and calculated. Each sheet revealed a crime, each piece of evidence stripped away a lie. Mortimer tried to defend himself. Sweat began to bead along his brow. The story he had crafted so carefully started to crumble. Then they called Evelyn. She walked to the center of the room without haste, without trembling, without hesitation. The dignity with which she stopped before the magistrate made the entire chamber straighten in their seats. "Miss Hargrave," the magistrate said, "would you like to relate your experience to the court?" Evelyn lifted her chin. Her voice filled the space, steady, clear, unwavering. 5 years is a long time," she began, "long enough to erase a person, but I was not erased." A murmur swept through the room. "I was not shut away for madness nor for any danger I posed," she continued. "I was shut away because I existed, and for certain men, my mere existence was far too inconvenient." All eyes turned toward Mortimer. Evelyn drew a breath. "I didn't come here seeking revenge," she said. "I came seeking prevention. I want what happened to me never to happen to anyone else. I want no woman removed from the world simply because someone decided her voice was an irritation." She paused, and her gaze found Adrian's. "And I stand here today because someone believes in the truth," she said, "and because I am no longer afraid of it." Adrian felt his chest tighten, not with pain but with a respect so deep it almost hurt. She was the strongest woman he had ever known, not because she was unscarred, but because of what she had done with her scars. Mortimer's defense collapsed. "She is an illegitimate girl seeking—" "That is enough," the magistrate cut in, his tone sharp as ice. "Hold your insolence. We have more than enough evidence." Mortimer swallowed the rest of his words. The trial went on with more testimony, more documents, more unmasking, and hours later the verdict came. "Guilty," the magistrate declared, "on charges of fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and abuse of authority." The sentence fell on Mortimer like stone, and the chamber, and once buzzing with whispers, fell silent. When people began to file out, Adrian remained still for a moment before turning to Evelyn. She was watching him with the calm of someone who already knew. "You're free, Evelyn," he said softly. "Truly free." She dipped her head in a small nod, a quiet gesture rich with meaning. "Now we can begin," she replied. Adrian didn't ask, begin what? He didn't need to. Whatever came, future, restitution, rebuilding, they would walk it side by side. And for the first time in that building thick with political shadows, the air felt lighter. They left together, not as victim and culprit, not as rescued and rescuer, but as two people who had chosen to face the same fate. The world was waiting. And at last, they were ready. 3 months after Mortimer's trial, Wiltshire awoke under a gentle light, the kind that seems to settle softly over the world, as if offering a beginning without noise. Evelyn drew a breath in front of the mirror. The gown was not extravagant. No imported lace, no glittering embroidery. It was simple, elegant, a soft pearl white that seemed made for movement, for air, for reminding her that she owed nothing to the walls that once surrounded her. "Mrs." Pemberley smoothed a stray lock of hair behind her ear slowly, as if tucking away a treasure. "You are perfect, my dear," she said, emotion trembling beneath her attempt at composure. Evelyn smiled, a full smile that began in her chest and reached her eyes. "I didn't know if I would ever wear white," she confessed. "I didn't know if I would ever see you this alive," Pemberley replied, pride bright in her gaze. The ceremony would be held in the small chapel on the estate, the same room that months before had witnessed difficult silences and painful revelations. Now, it would shelter something delicate, simple, true. When Evelyn stepped through the door, the late afternoon light wrapped around her like a natural veil. Nothing about her clamored for attention, and yet everything about her drew the eye. Adrian, waiting at the front, went utterly still. Not because he was nervous, he had stood before courts and powerful men without so much as a tremor, but because he had never truly dared imagine he would see Evelyn like this, strong, serene, choosing to be there. The woman who had survived the impossible. The woman now walking toward him. The heart that had so long carried guilt now held something else. Gratitude. Quiet and profound. Evelyn drew closer. When she stopped before him, there was no music, no loud gathering. Only the sound of their breathing, hers and his, steady, intimate. The local magistrate, chosen because Adrian trusted him, opened the book. "Evelyn Hargrave," he said, "do you freely choose to join your life to that of Adrian Beaumont, Duke of Beaumont?" Evelyn lifted her face. There was no hesitation, there was choice. "I do." Adrian nearly closed his eyes. He knew each syllable of that answer was a gift. "And you, Adrian Beaumont?" "Yes," he replied at once. Even the magistrate smiled. "Then speak your vows," he said. Adrian took Evelyn's hands, warmed them with his own. "I promise that no door will ever be closed against you again," he said. "I promise that this house, and everything I am, will be your shelter, if you wish it. I promise to be every day the man I chose to become beside you." Evelyn felt her lungs fill with a sweet, aching weight. "I promise I will never again be a shadow," she answered. "I will walk at your side because I want to, not because fate left me no other path. I promise to say your name, Adrian, whenever I need you to listen, and I promise that what we build together will not rest on titles or on the past, but on choice. Only choice." Silence fell, the kind of silence that feels like a blessing. The magistrate drew a breath. "Then, by the authority entrusted to me, I declare you husband and wife." Evelyn barely had time to breathe before Adrian drew her gently to him and kissed her. There was no urgency in that kiss. There was reverence, there was promise, there was home. The small gathering applauded. Mrs. Pemberley discreetly brushed away a tear that threatened to fall. Outside, a bird released a single clear note, as if to mark the moment. Evelyn smiled against Adrian's mouth. He rested his forehead against hers, his voice low, almost breaking. "My lady." Evelyn's smile deepened as she closed her eyes. "Yours," she whispered. "Finally yours. But free. Always free." And so, with their fingers entwined, they stepped out of the chapel. Not because fate had been repaired, not because a debt had been neatly paid, not because their scars had vanished, but because, after surviving the worst, they had chosen to share the best. Together. Whole. And free. Epilogue. 1 year later. Spring had arrived early in Wiltshire, so early it felt impatient to bloom before all others, eager to keep pace with the new life that now filled the estate. Evelyn walked slowly through the garden, her hand resting over the gentle curve of her rounded belly. The baby moved in soft, steady flutters, a tender insistence reminding her that life could still be generous. Adrian came up behind her, slipping his arms around her with the same careful devotion that had never once waned. "Are you comfortable?" he asked, voice low. "More than I ever thought possible," she murmured, smiling as she leaned back against him. A few steps away, in the shade of a cherry tree freshly dressed in blossoms, a dark-haired child played with a cloth ball. Daniel, their firstborn, let out bright, wholehearted laughter, the kind only children deeply certain of love ever learn to make. Evelyn watched him dash across the grass, full of restless curiosity. "He's grown so quickly," she said softly. "He takes after his mother," Adrian replied, quiet pride warming every word. "Determined to live every second." She laughed, a warm, light sound that still surprised her chest. There were days when the past drifted close, hovering at the edges of her mind like an old persistent shadow. Sometimes she woke before dawn, unsure for a breath where she was. But all she had to do was look around, at Adrian, at Daniel, at the child growing inside her, to feel the truth that had taken root deep within. She had won, not just survived. Won. "You know," Adrian murmured, brushing a kiss to her temple, "I still fear I'll wake one morning and discover all this was only a dream." Evelyn turned in his arms, touching his face with a tenderness so feather-light it seemed made of sunlight. "It isn't a dream," she whispered. "It's a reward." A soft breeze stirred the cherry blossoms, sending petals drifting around them like small pieces of spring. Daniel called out to them, laughing as he chased after his ball. Evelyn rested her head against Adrian's chest, feeling their second child shift and stretch, already claiming space in the world waiting for him. Somewhere beyond the trees, the remains of the old tower lay almost entirely hidden beneath creeping ivy. The ruin remained as a symbol, not of pain but of what had been overcome. The past stayed there, tucked away in that forgotten corner of the land. Her future was elsewhere, among flowers, among laughter, among choices freely made, among hands that would never let her fall. And so once, without bars, without shadows, without fear, Evelyn Hargrave blossomed, and with her, everything they had planted together.